In this video, I'm going to share the 7 habits that will help you become a millionaire by age 35. Let's jump into it. A couple of years ago, we joined about 9% of the US population when we reached that 7-figure mark. That's right, we reached the millionaire status at the young age of 35. The funny thing is, we haven't told a soul that we're millionaires. And somehow now I have the confidence to tell all of YouTube that we're millionaires. That's right, we reached that $1 million threshold, and we did it at a relatively young age. So I'm going to show you exactly how we got there, the steps we took so that you can also achieve the same thing. Spoiler alert, we did it without a large inheritance or windfall. And we started with a household income of about 200% of the federal poverty line. And we both worked in nonprofits for the large majority of our career. $1 million is kind of an arbitrary number, but it is a major milestone along your journey to financial independence. So I want to show you how you can do the same. And if you're already over the age of 35, these same principles should apply to anyone, regardless of age. This video is going to be split up into 3 separate sections. First part will be the timeline, and we'll show how long it took us to get to $1 million. And I'm even going to break down the time between each 100K milestone. In the second part of the video, we're going to show you the 7 habits that we formed on the path to $1 million. And at the end of the video, we're going to share with you the full breakdown of that $1 million. So stick around until the end if you're curious how much of that is cash, real estate, investments, or other assets. We're going to share all those details, so let's get into it. In 2021, we became millionaires, about 12 years after we graduated college. For those of you who don't know, Jess and I met in college and got married the summer after graduation. At graduation, we had about $10,000 to our name, so that's our starting point. Several months after graduation, we'd end up moving to New Jersey where I would start grad school, and we both ended up working full-time. Jess also went to grad school while we were in New Jersey, and so we ended up spending about 4.5 years in New Jersey. Those first 4.5 years in New Jersey would prove to be very formative years, both in creating specific money habits and allowing us to establish our careers in the nonprofit sector, which would lead to future income growth and opportunities. 4.5 years after graduating college, when we moved from New Jersey to Boston, we had amassed a net worth of $116,454. We didn't know it at the time, but it would take us roughly 7 more years to get to $1 million. Based on how long it took us to get to 100K, I never would have guessed we would get to $1 million in less than double that time. They say that first 100K is the hardest, and that was true in our situation. So let's show you exactly how long it took us to gain each 100K. So that first 100K took us 50 months. The second one was just 26 months. We reached the third 100K in 12 more months. You reached the fourth in 8 more months. We reached the 5th, so $500,000 was 4 months from 400K. The 600K was another 7 months. The 7th 100K was 15 more months. The 8th 100K was another 9 months. And things really picked up from there. We reached 900K in another 3 months, and then $1 million in just 2 more months. So that was our journey to $1 million and how long it took us to get from $10,000 to $1 million. So over the course of the 12 years it took us to get from $10,000 to $1 million, we formed 7 really intentional habits that helped us reach that $1 million status. And I'm going to walk you through those habits one by one, and I think you'll agree with me that the last habit was the one that contributed the most to our success, but that's not to take away from any of the other habits. So let's get into them. Habit number 1 is to avoid debt like the plague. With the exception of our mortgage, we truly did avoid debt at all costs. This started with graduating college debt-free, but also applied to never carrying a balance on our credit card and never taking out a loan for a car. The benefits of staying debt-free were threefold. The first is we're paying no money in interest. The second benefit is that it frees up so much money in our monthly income to use however we want. And the third is that it allows us to invest and save so much sooner than our peers who are paying down their student loans or paying off their brand new car. So that's the first habit: avoid debt like the plague. The second habit that we formed is to live below our means. This means that our monthly income should always be greater than our monthly expenses. This is very popular advice and even a little cliche, but I'm convinced that this habit put us on a trajectory to reach a millionaire status at a young age. When we first started out and were living in New Jersey, we were really thrust into adulthood. We were now living in a high cost of living area with very little work experience and low paying jobs. And so this meant that we didn't have much discretionary spending. A few years ago, I stumbled across our budget from 2009 when we were living in New Jersey. So as you can see here, the big three categories of housing, food, and transportation totaled 74% of our budget. This is as bare bones of a budget as you can get. And you can see that for discretionary spending, we have about $250 per month. Suffice it to say that it was really difficult to live below our means when we first started out. But it did teach us some important skills of frugality and being intentional with our money that then compounded when we were able to increase our income and increase the discretionary spending. An important note here is that as our financial position has improved over the years, we've had to unlearn some of those frugal skills and controlling our spending to better enjoy life and live a life that isn't as driven by scarcity. But we do still live below our means and is a big part of the reason why we reached $1 million. The third habit that we formed was to prioritize savings early on. This means saving for future expenses, whatever that might be in the future, before spending on discretionary items now. When I found that 2009 budget, I also stumbled across a spreadsheet from 2011. And this was a kind of a critical inflection point where Jess's income increased significantly. She was working for AmeriCorps making $11,000, and then overnight she went from $11,000 per year to 40 something per year. And so I found this spreadsheet where we were analyzing what to do with the additional income each month. I estimated the increase to be about $2,000 after taxes, and here's how I broke it down. The $1,722 of additional spending, over half of that was dedicated to retirement and savings. And that's not even counting the $240 remaining at the bottom of the spreadsheet that I didn't account for. This really helped us latch on to that idea of saving first. Learning to save money is really essential to building wealth. The next habit is starting retirement contributions early. When I was in the last year of my undergrad, I actually accepted a full-time job at the university. It was somewhat of an unusual situation for an undergrad student to be working at the university, but it ended up being that I knew the right people and they had a last-minute vacancy. That job came with a retirement option. I wish I could say I opted in for that retirement plan, but I passed it over immediately. Part of it was thinking about just working for the university for a semester, and so the job was very temporary. But the bigger reason was I didn't think I needed to start saving for retirement. I remember telling my soon-to-be father-in-law about this decision and the rationale for it, saying that I didn't need to save for retirement yet, that I was too young. I'm not sure where this idea comes from, but it's a really popular myth in the personal finance space. I hear it from so many of my friends who are now in their 30s and 40s. And that conversation with my father-in-law ended up switching my mindset so that when I did accept another full-time job later in that year after graduation, I started to prioritize it and think about how much I needed to save for retirement. And by saving and investing early, a lot of our wealth has come from the gains or compound interest. In fact, I did a basic estimate of our current wealth and where we are today, and I estimate that about 40% of our wealth is currently a result of gains or compound interest. So not the contributions that we've directly made, but from the growth and appreciation of those assets. And that's with only about 14 years of investment history. Think about how much bigger that will be 10, 20, 30 years from now. Real quick, if you're liking this content and getting value out of it, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button and also subscribe to the channel for more content like this. The next habit was intentionally choosing to have one car. Until we purchased our van last year, we've operated the majority of our adult lives with just a single car. And it really hasn't been that hard to do. The reason why we've stuck to it over the years, even though we had the means to buy and operate a second vehicle, is that it saves us so much money each year. AAA estimates that the average annual cost of a new car is about $10,728. This estimate includes depreciation, fuel, maintenance, insurance, license and registration, among other things. But it's an estimate for what it costs to own and operate a vehicle. This cost will vary based on the age of the vehicle, the miles that you drive, the type of miles that you're driving, whether it's city or highway, among many other things, but the idea is that this is a rough estimate for what it costs to operate a vehicle. So using this general rule of thumb, by having one car instead of two, we instantly save about $10,000 per year. So let me give you an example just to help you understand how this one decision compounds over long periods of time. Take the $10,728 per year and let's invest that in a stock index fund. Now let's assume a 5% growth rate that is adjusted for inflation. And if you do this for 30 years, even a short working career, you would have an extra $712,000. And of which about $321,000 is contributions. The rest is growth. And taking that same figure, after about 12 years, you have about $180K. So one way of looking at our $1 million status after about 12 years and having a single car for most of that is about $180K of that was a result of this one decision. $180,000 is not as impressive as $712 by any means, but it's still a really impressive number. So the next habit is to buy and live in a reasonably sized home. When we first bought our house in 2014 and we bought it for a little over $400,000, it seemed a bit scary. Jess and I had both grew up in low cost of living areas, and so this number was a bit of a shock to us. It's proven to be an important part of our wealth accumulation strategy for a couple of reasons. One is that it's appreciated significantly over the 9 years that we've lived here. The second is that we bought a house that met all of our needs. There have been times when 1,000 square feet felt small or that we wanted more space. But after living in a van 3 months for this year, 1,000 square feet feels huge. And so buying a space that meets all of our needs prevented us from selling the house, buying a bigger house, and all of those transaction fees. And lastly, our mortgage and HOA have been fixed this whole time. They've stayed flat. When we first bought our house, I remember paying less in our mortgage than the 1-bedroom apartment that we were renting for a year prior. What? That's crazy. And so while rent has continued to increase over time, our mortgage has stayed nice and flat. And so this has allowed us to control our expenses and again continue to put more of our money towards investments and savings. The last habit is to regularly ask yourself how you can provide value to your employer. Jess and I have both had successful careers in the nonprofit sector and saw annual increases far greater than the typical 3% cost of living adjustment. So while the other habits are focused on managing your expenses and controlling your spending, this habit is solely focused on increasing your income. When we first started out, Jess and I were literally at about 200% of the federal poverty line. If you imagine the federal poverty line here, we were at 200% of it. But with steady increases in promotions, we both exceeded the 6-figure income mark. And so this, combined with those other habits that help control your spending, really creates a superpower and allowed us to accumulate wealth quite quickly. Now, going into exactly how we increased our income each year is well beyond the scope of this video, but we'll include some articles and resources in the description below, including an article that Jess wrote a few years back about doubling her income in 4 years. Check them out if you think that would be really helpful to you. And now let's break down what made up our net worth of $1 million. When we crossed the $1 million threshold, we had $200,000 in cash. We also had $600,000 in investments and $170,000 in equity in real estate. And note that this is equity. Technically, we have both an asset and what the value of the home is and our mortgage. So this is the difference between the two. And then we had $30,000 in other. So that's our breakdown of our $1 million net worth. If you're watching this video, it means you're being really intentional with your money. And there's no better way to learn than learning from others. That's why we regularly interview ordinary people who are living extraordinary lives. So I highly recommend you check out this playlist and all the interviews we've done with those ordinary people.